Good evening, TDN listeners, and of course, the audience of This Week in Interview. Welcome to another program, another episode of This Week in Interview in springtime, May 7th. And of course, the first week of May in the Caribbean, we celebrate Workers' Day, May Day. Some islands do it on the 1st of May, and some islands do it on May Day, the first Monday. And so, whichever day that you did, I hope you had a great day, a good time off from work. And of course, this week is also Nurses Week. So, all the nurses, I hope you are being appreciated and you feel appreciated. And we want to say thank you for all the work that you've been doing and continue to do. We know it's challenging to be a nurse, and we see all these reports of healthcare facilities cutting staff and conditions really being more challenging. In Dominica, we know that our nurses are under pressure because of the results that difficult to get at the Princess Margaret Hospital. It's called the China Dominica Friendship Hospital. Um, but we thank you also for the work that you do in the challenging circumstances with limited resources and all that. So, folks, welcome back to This Week in Interview. To those who are regularly tuned in on a Wednesday, welcome back. I really appreciate you. And if tonight is the first time that you are with This Week in Interview, welcome as well. I hope you like the program. The program we try to organize in such a way that you don't see or hear what we do anywhere else. Same topics, similar topics, but we try to approach it differently, from a different angle, from a different lens, to bring in experts and persons with experience, with training, and I have conversations with them, and I share those conversations with you. And a lot of times, that's the highlight of my week. That Wednesday night where we spend an hour or so. The RVR Jams in Dominica carries This Week in Interview live on DigiPlay channel 59. So if you're looking at us from there, welcome. Also, while I'm doing that, I'm going to ask you and invite you to share the link with your friends and family. Let them know that This Week in Interview is on air and they are going to miss a great program if they don't tune in. Online radio SBE in the Toronto market as well carries This Week in Interview live. So good night to you if you're in Canada. I understand that soon we might be in the same country. I mean, not say that so I don't offend any Canadians, right? But no, we appreciate all our listeners in Canada, in the US, in South America, in the Caribbean, wherever you're listening from, especially if you on Instagram or Facebook or any of the other platforms, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, click on notifications. Also, make a comment. Those of you who normally participate in the chat, we'll incorporate your contributions and chat and put it on for our guests so that they can respond. Speaking of guests, I want to welcome back a part of the TDN family, my brother Alvin Thomas. He is my guest tonight because, as I said at the top of the program, it's May Day, it's Workers' Day, and of course we think of trade unions and trade and organized labor, organized workers. And so Alvin spent a number of years as the general secretary of at the time it was called the Civil Service Association in Dominica. Right now the name has been changed to Public Service Union, but it's still the same, representing workers, particularly workers in the public sector who are employed by government. But even while he was there, he was a stalwart in the trade union movement in Dominica in general, in the region, as a matter of fact, and maybe international as well. So I thought he was the best person to bring on the program tonight to talk about trade unions and trade unionism. What has been the role of trade union? We know trade union has been under attack for decades now. When Ronald Reagan was president, of the United States in the 80s. I remember he had there was a time when there was a strike by some of the air traffic controllers and some of the folks at the airports, and he had gone on the offensive and fired a bunch of them. And since after that, persons have lost their sort of respect and fear of unions, and they've found ways at whittling little by little the power that unions have and they possess. But a lot of the amenities, a lot of the enhancements in our life we owe to the trade union movement, the better working hours that employers cannot just do what they want and have you work and reduce your pay and not provide you with safety equipment and all of those things and give you better wages so that you can improve the conditions of your family and all of those things are attributed to the work of the trade unions. And so I want to welcome Alvin. Alvin, welcome back to this weekend interview. It's always a pleasure to have you on. So welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Yes, it's a pleasure to be back on this weekend interview. Always look forward to engaging with you and your guests and having a conversation on issues I believe that are pertinent to have that conversation. So it's good to be back. It's like coming home. You know, it's
Is it
not
your
it's
home?
not it's not it's not the prodigal son coming home, just the
No, no,
regular
no.
son coming home.
It's
Huh?
it's our envoy or emissary that we send out into the world and he comes back home for respite, and recharge.
Yes,
That's what it
yes,
is.
yes,
There's
yes.
nothing prodigal about it because
Right, right. So it's, yeah. So
we
it's a
follow
pleasure to
what
be
you
back.
do,
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yes,
we see you engaged. We see you engaged in so many different areas. I
yes.
just wonder, you know, such a young man, where you get all that energy and knowledge
And I mean,
and
I was saying to someone today, it looked like I'm more involved now that I'm retired. When I say retired, I mean not working for someone else
right.
than when I had what is called a job, because I mean, my hands are filled, man. You know, but I enjoy it, and you know, you've heard this from me, and you will continue to hear it. You, as a former JC yourself, as a former JC, we've both been president of JCs. I'm a senator now. I'm sure at one point you will get that honor conferred. There is this one line in our JCI creed that says, "Service to humanity is the best work of life." And I
Yes.
believe if you engage in doing just that, service to humanity, you don't see it as a task, as a struggle or anything. It's service to humanity, the best work of life. And anything that is the best work of life, it will keep you going, it will keep you active, it will keep you young, you know, because that's just what it is, the best work of life.
And I know you also have expanded your business into Dominica.
Yes,
You. For those that don't know, you have a business in the eye care industry,
yes,
and opened an outlet in Dominica, providing great service, fashionable glasses, but functional and high quality. And so, I want to give you the opportunity to tell the folks a little bit about that venture before we launch into our main topic tonight.
certainly. Well, thank you for that opportunity again, Tony. Yes, in earlier this year, February to be exact, we opened an outlet, a shop in Dominica called Opti Shop, and it's a subsidiary of our company here in Atlanta, Opti Precision. And we are engaged in producing, manufacturing prescription eyewear, both prescription and non-prescription eyewear for adults, for kids. Um, we will soon be having contact lens down in Dominica. We do have contact lens up here in the US, in Atlanta, but we'll soon be having that. But we provide a whole range of prescription sunglasses, regular glasses. And so, yes, it's been going so far, so good. I mean, knowing, of course, it's the economy in which we operate. It can be a challenging environment, and I guess with all Trump's tariff that coming into play very shortly, we'll see how much that impacts the end product. We still do manufacture the actual eyeglasses up here in North America. It is our hope that as this business expand, because it's the intention to have it grow not just in Dominica but throughout, at least to start in the sub-region, the OECS, and branch out to the wider Caribbean, that'll be able to have a manufacturing lab set up in the region. That way, all the manufacturing and everything will be done right down in the region. But it's going, and we have been able to partner with various organizations on the country. One of the things that we plan on doing extensively, well, two areas actually. Customer service has to be critical, and I'm fortunate to say that so far I've been getting good reviews, good report. Employees, customers who go into business report back to me that they are wow by the customer service that they receive. So I'm very pleased about that. And also we plan to get into some philanthropy, meaning that we'll work with various underserved, underprivileged areas in the country that may or may not be able to acquire prescription glasses, where we can partner with them and provide that. My two sons, and the youngest, Kenan, is one of those social media guru. So we do have he's into that. That's his area as far as the operation of the business. He does a lot of that. So we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. If you go in there, OptiShop at handle Instagram, Facebook, website, you name it. And then we have also partnered with a couple how should I say it? Entertainers, if that's one of the better words. So persons like Shelley with Signal Band is an ambassador for the brand. And they recently crowned Miss OECS, Miss Dominica, Miss OECS is also an ambassador for the brand. So we're doing all, all that various marketing initiatives. But I just want to say thanks to everyone who have patronized the business, and to say a big thank you to all of them, and look forward to growing the business. And as I say, growing it whereby we can expand not just in Dominica, but throughout the sub-region and the wider Caribbean.
Yeah, certainly, and of course, Dominica needs that. Our people need high quality eye care at affordable prices, fashionable as well, because we see, we are when we see videos from Dominica is not lagging behind in terms of fashion and so on.
Certainly not. Certainly not.
And so OptiShop and its product fits right in.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I had a personal experience while I was in Dominica in February. I actually went into the shop, and there's some lovely young ladies in there, very welcoming, very warm, and they make you feel right at home. And the products on display, well displayed. So, folks, if you haven't gone in, just go in. You don't have to need a glasses or sunglasses. Just go in and experience OptiShop. It's right on King George V Street, right on the corner of King George V Street and Great George
Anyone
Street.
who knows Sims's is a good landmark. Yeah. It's just two buildings down from Sims's. Same side with Sims's. Yeah.
Yeah, it's right there, right on the intersection where Great George Street dead ends into King George V Street. All right, so Alvin, good job, good luck with that. I know we spoke about collaborating on the upcoming Castlebrus reunion in August, so we'll continue with that. So those of you from Castlebrus, we are looking to run an eye clinic, and OptiShop has given a verbal agreement to look at how they can cooperate with us and bring some eye care quality to the folks who come to the reunion at Castlebrus. So let's launch into our topic for tonight, Alvin. When I got to know you, you were the General Secretary at the CSA, and I know your passion for labor. You were deeply involved with anything coming out of the International Labor Organization, the ILO. You were involved in labor movement in the Caribbean, in the OECS, and of course, you were pretty much on the leadership platform in terms of trade unionism in Dominica. So you are the ideal person. There's a lot of people who maybe are 25, 30 years old who would have missed the heyday of the trade union movement in every part of the world. And so I want to start by having you give just a very general explanation of why was it necessary in the first place to have trade unions and organized workers, and having recognized that, what kind of role, what impact has it had on the life of not only the workers but their families and the communities in general?
All right, Tony. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to be your guest and to discuss to have this conversation on a topic that is very dear to my heart. First of all, let me say to all those listening, all the workers throughout Dominica, wherever you are, the region, across the globe, who have just celebrated Workers' Day, Labor's Day, whatever you want to call it. Happy Labor's Day to you. Happy Workers' Day. One of the things I will say from the onset is that there is this myth that the trade unions have outlived their usefulness, or trade unions no longer necessary, or trade unions will go. I mean, that is a myth. This is furthest thing from the truth. And I want to do so by, first of all, prefacing my comments by referencing the Constitution of Dominica. I always like to go there because in any society, in any state, this is what guides the relationship between the people and the state. Your Constitution. It's like the Bible then. So in our Constitution, which starts off with a preamble that says, whereas blah, 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 blah. The next section after the Constitution is what is called the chapter 1. Generally, it deals with the protection of fundamental rights and freedom. That is what that chapter covers. And it is the same throughout most constitutions throughout the region. And under that particular chapter, as it relates to fundamental rights and freedoms, under section 11 of that constitution, section 11.1 to be precise, it says there that every person has the right to assemble freely and to associate with others, including forming or joining trade unions or other associations for the protection of their interests. So in our Constitution, the word trade union is inscribed there, it's written there as an organization that an individual in Dominica has a fundamental right to belong to. It doesn't mention well, the actual section is captioned protection of freedom of assembly and association. So there are associations of several other groups. You have association of doctors, of employers, of what you name it. But it specifically mentioned the word trade unions in the Constitution. So that in itself tells you the importance of a trade union. That is enshrined in the Constitution. Now, let me just take that a little further. And I looked at the other constitutions throughout the region. And I can point out there are 8 other constitutions, namely St. Lucia. St. Lucia Constitution, section 11.1.2, because as you know, St. Lucia gave their independence about the same time as us. And it says there in their provision, individuals have the right to assemble freely and associate with others, including forming or joining trade unions. Antigua has the same thing. Trade unions is mentioned there. Grenada has the same thing. Trade union is mentioned there. St. Kitts and Nevis also have the word trade union. St. Vincent also have trade unions mentioned there. Guyana also have trade unions. Barbados have the word trade unions. Now, let me just go back now and tell you, in the case of St. Lucia, in addition to trade unions, they have the word political parties. So in St. Lucia's case, for example, St. Lucia has individuals have the right to assemble freely and associate with others, including forming or joining trade unions or political parties. That's in
Wow.
St. Lucia.
Mhm,
Now,
mhm.
in St. Kitts also have political parties. St. Kitts says every person has the right to assemble freely and associate with others, including forming or joining trade unions or political parties. And the other
So
one,
were they independent after Dominica?
St. Kitts came after Dominica, yes. St. Kitts came
Mm.
after Dominica. St. Lucia came about the same time with us. And then you have now in Guyana. Guyana has, every person has the right to assemble freely, associate with others, and demonstrate peacefully, including forming or joining political parties, trade unions, or other associations for the protection of their interests. So the only three that, well, there may be others, but the three that I researched that has political parties are Guyana, St. Kitts, and St. Lucia. But they
St.
all
Lucia.
have trade unions mentioned there. But interestingly, though, in the case of Jamaica and Trinidad, Trinidad does not make mention of trade unions or political parties. Trinidad says the Constitution recognizes the right to freedom of association and assembly as fundamental human rights. That's in Trinidad.
Mhm.
And in Jamaica, Jamaica has individuals have the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, subject to the limitation in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, or public health. That's in Jamaica. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this to say to you, Tony, and your guests, that that tells you the importance of having a trade union, because it's one of your fundamental rights.
Right.
So the notion that, well, trade union is going to go away, it's not going to go away. It's in your constitution. Now, as we engage in the conversation tonight, we will discuss the evolution of trade unions, where they were back in the 1930s or thereabout when they came about, and where they are today. Now, let me just juxtapose a bit and say, therefore, that your fundamental rights and freedom are not necessarily the same as your, one might say, your human rights, intrinsic rights. So, for example, your fundamental rights, like I've just explained, these are the rights explicitly enshrined in your constitution. Okay? They are legally enforceable within the jurisdiction and can be protected by courts. So anyone can go to the court, again, under our constitution, under section, I believe it is section 16.1 of our constitution, which speaks to enforcement of protective provision. So under section 16.1 of our constitution, if any one of those fundamental rights are violated, you could seek redress under section 16.1, 2, and whatever of the constitution. Now, human rights, in terms of the definition now, would more appropriately refer to your universal right, inherent, as it says, to the human regardless of nationality. Now, as far as the trade union, and to be more specific to the question you've asked, the trade union movement this year, for example, this year May Day, marks 87 years since the first May Day celebration was held in Jamaica. 87 years. So clearly, that predates any political parties in the region. And I always have to say that. It predates political party, it predates CARICOM, it predates most of those institutions that you're aware of. Even the United Nations, in its current structure as it was formed back in the 1940-something, the trade unions were there well before that, starting off in the early, what one would consider the colonial period, pretty much right after the abolition of slavery. And then, of course, if I may go back a little to the reference to the Constitution and the fundamental rights, the reference is made to enforceability, meaning that your right to form a trade union as enshrined in the Constitution is enforceable in the court of law. And therein, therefore, in the case of Dominica, you have several pieces of legislations that have been enacted over the years, which is coming out, as one might say, out of the Constitution. So you have, for example, the Industrial Relations Act of 1986, Chapter 8901, that deals with the recognition of the trade unions, the collective bargaining, industrial agreements, dispute resolution, unfair practices, essential services. All that is encapsulated in this Industrial Relations Act of 1986. And then, of course, you have Labor Standard Act. These were passed way back in the 70s. I think the original act was of 1977, which has had subsequent amendments throughout. Then you have the Labor Contract Act, another piece of legislation in 1983. And you have the Labor Protection Act, again in 1977. Then you have the Trade Union and Trade Dispute Act, Chapter 8903 of the Revised Laws of Dominica. So that is to show you the evolution of the movement over the years, and all of that was as a result of the early efforts of many persons, many individuals. In the case of Dominica, you had persons like Isilo Black, who was a champion in the early 30s when was advocating on behalf of the working people. He was just an ordinary mason, young man from Grand Bay, and didn't like the way workers were being treated. Bear in mind, I said that came out of the early 30s thereabout, where we had a lot of manual workers. You had farms, either lime farms, citrus farms, you name it. And then as it's evolved, we evolved to a little more industrialized era. The union, came on board. The CSA, for example, the CSA as an organization, it was not a trade union then. It was just an organization, what is called a staff association, because at the time, the workers, the civil servant workers, primarily, felt that there was a need for them to collectively come together. And they formed what is called the Civil Service Association, not as a trade union, just as an association. And that was way back in 1939. It wasn't until somewhere around 1968, thereabout, the latter part of the 60s, that they officially registered as a trade union. And like you rightly pointed out, it is now referred to as the Dominica Public Service Union. So that kind of give you. Then you had, for example, in Jamaica, you had several of the countries. You had Bustamante in Jamaica, Alexander Bustamante, and we've those of us who have read or did some history recognize he was one of the lead players back then in Jamaica. You had Uriah Butler in Trinidad as another player. You had in Barbados, you had Grantley Adams, and some of those names you might hear are kind of familiar of persons who eventually progressed into politics, which is an area we will have a little discussion on.
We'll definitely have a discussion on that. All right.
Then you had
let go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Look, you can finish that point.
I was just about to say that you had throughout the region, Grenada, Dominica, those areas I mentioned. But I think the surgeons or the impetus in what maybe came about the 30s, as you may have might be aware of, was what was called following out what was called the Moyne Commission. Because again, like I said, most of the islands coming out of slavery were plantation type work. In Trinidad case, for example, Guyana, you had oil. But throughout the rest, Jamaica, St. Kitts was sugar cane. You had those workers there, and conditions were horrible. And those folks decided, no, we can't have that. And part of that too came out from England, because back then in England, you had the British labor organization being formed. And that too was an impetus for folks in those colonies to form themselves. So what happened then was you had this series of uprising taking place. It started somewhere in Jamaica, the Trinidad, spread throughout the islands like wildfire. Like they say, la bab kamawadu puidife uzesa, otherwise the fire is going to spread, and that's exactly what happened. And so the British government now sent a commission out to say, well, hey, let's go down there and see what's going on in these colonies to squall this unrest. And one of the things coming out, one of the recommendations, was that there should be trade unions. And as a result of that, several of them started emerging, started off in Jamaica, in Trinidad, and to some extent in the rest of the islands. In Dominican case, I would say somewhere around the 50s, thereabout. The trade union, the Dominican trade union was the first, started out back then. Like I said, it was ECLO Black. And then everything else comes. CSA came, WAU came, DAO came, DTU came, National Workers Union, you name it. All of that started evolving.
Right. And so thank you for that broad and comprehensive sort of setting the backdrop for our conversation. What I want to add to what you just said was from a layman's perspective, I want to put it, like, position it in the mind of the audience, that if you imagine in the colonies, in the islands of the Caribbean and in America, you're coming out of slavery, where the workers were owned by the plantation. And so because they were owned by the plantation, they didn't have to give account to anybody. Not even like now where you have animal rights. So if you have a workhorse or something, you're punished for cruelty. Those laws do not exist. And so we can imagine that the owners of the plantations were used to resorting to very brutal tactics and cruelty to punish anybody that they deemed did not do what they wished, or to set an example so others would not get an idea of opposing or objecting, and also seeing the workers as just another commodity of production. And so they would minimize any accommodation, any kind of incentive, anything, just to keep you alive and strong enough so you can get up and go to work tomorrow. And so with the abolition of slavery and the genesis of a workforce, you can imagine that the people who employed them would be coming with that same mindset, where they would feel like, well, I have to try to get as much as I can from these workers, especially now that I have to pay them where I didn't have to pay them before. So I need to minimize my cost, and at the same time I have to maximize the output. So it's as if you have a business and you have your own transportation, and for whatever reason your transportation goes out of commission and now you have to rent a fleet from somebody else. You're going to automatically think that now I have to pay the rent, I have to squeeze as much as I can from that vehicle so that I can make enough to keep my level of profit that I had and still make up for the cost of the rental. And because the rental doesn't belong to me, I don't have to change the oil on time. I can run it into the ground because that doesn't belong to me. And so with that type of mentality, we can imagine the conditions that those workers had to be enduring. And of course, any one person that tried to stand up and object, you could easily just get rid of them, either by firing them or continue to brutalize them. And so the concept of the union, of the organized, like to call it organized labor, is where a team says, if one of us stands up, that one person can get victimized and done away with. But if all 5 of us on the crew, all 20 of us on the crew were to stand up, the owner now has to consider, if I be harsh with them, I'm going to lose that whole section of production and it's going to start affecting my profitability. And so he is forced to consider the well-being of the workers. And not only that, sometimes if it's a big enough company, he can probably decide that they can lose that team for the time being and build it back up. But now the other team seeing that treatment to say, hey, if we treat them like that, we might be next. And so even if the condition is not directly affecting them at the moment, they stand in solidarity. And so a big word in the trade union movement is solidarity, where you have, like if you touch one, you touch all of us. And you even have that cross-pollination across unions. And so I really want us to dive into that aspect of it, because as I said, I'm sure there's a lot of young people who are in their 20s and maybe even early 30s that may not understand that aspect of organized labor, trade unionism. And especially, like, I work in construction in the US. When folks hear union, they always think that is going to cost more, because where you can get a carpenter and just pay him a straight $40 an hour, if he belongs to the union, you have to pay him $40 an hour, plus you have to pay union benefits because union. And so they see it as and so the everybody thinks that things are more expensive because unions cost so much. And that is what has been the narrative in the media for the last several years, where folks, a lot of people see unions as a negative. They associate unions with high cost, rather than seeing unions as being the firewall, so to speak, between the greed, but maybe not greed, but the motivation of an owner, an employer, to maximize his profit versus giving back, taking a little bit of that profit to ensure the well-being of the people who are producing that profit. And so I have to take a break because we are at the bottom of the hour. But
it's amazing how time runs. Yes,
time flies. When I come back, I will, in addition to your presentation that you have, I want us to really, get into that, so that the folks can understand the importance of unions in the whole quality of life and standard of living that we have now, that we are taking for granted so much that it seems like we're willing to give it away. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking about trade unionism with my guest, Mr. Alvin Thomas.
Presented by
a smart house run by a vengeful AI, a mute witness to an act of unspeakable evil. A breadfruit thief is haunted. A young man unwittingly creates a god. Giant crapos terrorize a community. A witch seeks revenge on her neighbors, and much more. The Piton Noir Writing Collective is thrilled to announce the release of the third book in their acclaimed anthology series, The Flying Crapo. Flying Crapo, Heroes and Monsters. Now available for purchase on Amazon.com. Get your copy today and embark on a journey filled with heroes, monsters, and the magic of the Caribbean.
People say I've got a great smile. Well, I have to say, this is all thanks to the professional team at Beacon Dental Group right here in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I've got world-class dental care. Beacon Dental Group has expert and caring staff dedicated to providing the most advanced and satisfactory treatment in all aspects of oral health. Their services are designed to meet your needs and give you a perfect smile, too. General checkups, cosmetic surgery, Gemini laser service, and advanced procedures, all in a state-of-the-art facility. Call or visit Beacon Dental Group today, 1026 Blue Hill Avenue, Dorchester, Massachusetts, or call 617-282-2146 for a smile that lights the world.
Looking to promote your business, engage current customers, and reach new people? Well, look no further. From the basic presentation to a fully fledged advertisement, Use your video ads to attract customers. At Man's Audiovisual Productions, we do just that. We produce videos for business and event promotions, product demo videos, animated explainer videos, fundraiser ads, and much, much more. Engage your clients and sell online. We customize the video to match your brand design. Guaranteed to play flawless on all devices, including smart TVs. Contact us at telephone number 203-690-4342 or 767-245-6238. Visit our website, mansaudiovisual.com, or email us at derekvideo@gmail.com.
Are we back?
Yeah.
There we're back. All right. So thank you guys for staying through the break, and thank you to our sponsors for their continued support. As we're approaching the school break holiday season, I want to encourage you to take a look at the books. We always advertise these books on our program, the Flying Crapo Collective, and all the other books that we have on there. Make that a gift to a young person, to yourself. So when you're on vacation, laying next to the pool on the beach, relaxing at your home in the evening, you have books that you can read. That most of those books are based in our islands, and so although they are works of fiction, they do reflect parts of our lives. And so I encourage you, to make, when you consider somebody's birthday or anniversary or christening or whatever it is, look carefully at the books that are written by our people and show them support. They make wonderful gifts because the stories are very, very well told and the writing is excellent. And so they make good gifts. Just put them in your consideration for your gifts. Also, Man's Audiovisual, you see the flyers that we make. All our graphic work on This Week in Interview is done by Man's Audiovisual. Check them out. They do flyers, they do video productions, they do all the works. They can carry your events live, weddings, funerals, parties, whatever it is that you want. Check out Man's Audiovisual for those services. So tonight, my guest is Mr. Alvin Thomas. I'm going to call him a trade unionist, although he hasn't, been at the helm or actively involved in a trade union for a while. But he has established himself as a staple in the organized labor trade union scene in Dominica and in the Caribbean. And this week being the Workers' Week, this week being Workers' Week, I invited him on so that he could talk to us about trade unionism, because trade union is it a dying phenomena? Do we even recognize the value of having organized labor? And Alvin went through in the first part and spoke about how it is so important that it is actually written into our constitution. And so, do we really understand it? Do we appreciate it the way we should? And are we at risk of losing the benefits of trade unions? I mean, what is your sense as you look?
Yeah.
And we can talk both about the US as well as in Dominica.
Yeah. I wouldn't say we'd lose it. I think what the trade union movement is more challenged now in terms of how it comes across to the workers. I mean, whereas in the 30s and 40s, 50s, whatever, as we said, the nature of the work was such that you had to add a particular appeal to the worker to have him or her join the union. Now it's a slightly different approach. By that I mean, for example, you have folks now, a lot of folks who work from home. People work remotely from home. That's a new type of work environment that exists. But that is not to say that those persons who work from home should not and cannot form themselves in a trade union movement. You had recently, right here in the US, a number of the folks in the Actors Guild, who were on strike for many, many months because they were not happy with the conditions that they were getting, both in terms of remuneration and conditions. Right in the US, the Actors Guild, you had actors, producers, writers, you name it. They were out there striking. Now, I will say, though, based on your observation and the comments that you made, that although back then in the 30s, we had more manual type workers against what we have now, at the end of the day, the employer has one objective, right? To provide a service and to maximize and make much out of that service that company provides, or a product. That's the intention. And usually, depending on the size of the organization, the biggest outlay there is that payment to the workers, the wage bill, the payroll. You see. Now, also, I think what has happened over the years and what we have to change as well, as particularly as it relates to young people, is one, to educate them in terms of what is it they're benefiting from today. How did it got there? And secondly, I think we have to get away from this sort of, how should I use the term? It's not a fight between unions and workers. And I think to the employer, the employees need to see, the employers, need to see that in their best interest. If you run a company, Tony, and you have a staff of 100 or even less than that, 200 folks, you have people in production, you have people in creative, you have in various areas of the company. Don't you think it's better that you deal with one spokesperson on behalf of the 100 or 200 employees than each employee coming to you to discuss a certain aspect of their job? Either their wages, either their hours, or whatever the case might be. That's not going to be cost effective for you either. So that's why I always say to employers, during my time when I had the opportunity, it's in your best interest to have that, because what you have now, you're able to discuss various aspects of work environment in a collective fashion with whoever is representing the employees through their unions, than you having to sit with each employee and discuss. So I think a lot has to do with how we get the message across. The messaging is key. And young people now being so engaged in other areas, social media, you name it, that's where the unions have to get engaged as well. You have to use those mediums to attract those young people. But I will say, for example, and I reference some of the legislations that are on the books in Dominica's case. If you take, for example, the Labor Standard Act, that was passed back in 1977. That's like how many years ago? That's like 40-something years ago. 1977. Now guess what areas that law covers? It empowers the ministers to set minimum wage, and we know that's an issue. We've been talking about minimum wage in Dominica. The working hours, because what would happen before, if we go back in the 30s, persons were allowed to work from sunrise all the way down past sunset.
Yep.
It was not like a minimum 8 hours or anything like that, As much as the planter on this estate could get from you, and as long as there was light, and if they were not light, they would provide maybe artificial light or what have you, they would get you to work. The whole question of leave entitlement, that was something. No leave, you work, employment records. So all of these issues fall under the Labor Standard Act. The question of the Protection of Employment Act, it deals with redundancy. Employer decide, you know what, I don't like Mr. Head again, let me just get rid of him. But the Protection of Employment Act provides for redundancy, it provides for notice of this, it provides for severance pay. So these are areas that will continue to affect workers, including young workers today. So a young worker who gets employed in a workplace in Dominica, his conditions as it relates to redundancy, if the company decides tomorrow morning, I want to get rid of him, they have to do it in conformity and in conformance with the Protection of Employment Act. And if, like I referred earlier to the Constitution, if this employee feel, well, hey, my rights as a worker was violated, he can now seek redress in the courts under the Constitution as well as the Act.
Right.
That's where he has recourse.
And,
In the absence of that,
the
in the
important
absence of
point,
that, he would be on his own.
the important point to make there is two important points. We talk about the Employment Act, but it didn't just come out of the goodness of the heart of employers and the government.
Exactly.
Unions had to negotiate really hard to get the terms on those acts to be favorable enough to workers. And two, an individual worker who feels that he has been wronged may not have the resources to go hire the best lawyer to go fight his case.
Absolutely.
His union provides that resources
Absolutely.
for him or her, right? So those 2 points highlight, the whole importance of having union. Sam is saying that's why employers don't like collective bargaining. They want individual employees to come to them.
That is
They
absolutely
can
true.
intimidate one person.
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So like I said, the employer would have a hold on intimidating this one employee in their office as against trying to intimidate the group, the collective. But like you just said, Tony, there are those benefits that were obtained years ago that are still there. These laws are not going anywhere, I don't see any government coming and repealing these laws. What they will do, they'll try to improve on them. And that is where now the unions have to constantly advocate. And I know time is coming up just now. It's amazing. It's how the time flies away. But that was one of the reasons too, why in the early 30s, 40s, and thereabout, the unions, they were agitating for those laws to improve the working condition of the workers, and they felt, we need to have friends in the legislature, and that was prior to even us becoming independent and all of that. You had this legislature made up of planters, landowners, and maybe 1-2 colonial white boys and so in there, until eventually we got independence. But in order to get any effective legislation, we have to have friends in there, or we ourselves have to go in there. And that is where the marriage and the relationship between unions and political party came about. You have in Jamaica the Norman Manley, we had the Grant Adams that we mentioned earlier,
Bustamante.
Bustamante. I mean, you go anyone, the Birds in Antigua, Eric Gary in Grenada, they felt, you know what, boy, for us to really make an impact, we have to make laws. We have to make laws. And it is my view too that when those constitutions were being discussed in terms of what should be in our constitution, again, the advocacy was made that word trade union must be part of our fundamental rights in our constitution. Our fundamental rights and freedom. That must be made mention in the constitution. Hence it is there. So I think what has happened now, or where we are now, is that given the given, one might say, the whole question of globalization, free trade, and you name it, the list can go on and on. What has emerged over the years have placed the unions now in a sort of different environment, and it requires of the unions now to approach it in a different strategy. The core principles of what a union stands for, and the role of a trade union vis-a-vis that of the worker will remain. That's not going to change. But I think in terms of the approach used, especially when it comes to young persons, For example, you have AI now. AI is a big deal. A lot of young people are going to get engaged in this whole thing they call AI and all of that. Yeah, you can form yourself in a union that protects your creative work and what you do as an AI creator. Because other than that, you will be whoever is the company that you're supposed to be working for in that social media space is likely to take advantage of you. So herein lies the fact for you to get involved. This technology and automation is improving, but that doesn't change the fact that whoever is involved in that space need to organize themselves. Like I mentioned earlier, the sort of informal work environment that we have. People work now remotely from home. An employer is more prone maybe to take advantage of that situation. Say, oh, Tony's working from home, so we can handle him and deal with him as we want.
You can call him at 5 a.m. in the
Call him
morning.
at 5 a.m. because he's working
Or
from
on
home.
Saturdays. Yeah.
Don't have respect for his space between the work and his family. Feel because he's working at home, you can do as you want. Again, that's where the trade union will come in and do that. One last thing I will say though, as I understand it, and I think you mentioned it earlier when you spoke, you mentioned the word solidarity. And that is very critical. Solidarity, not just at the individual union level, but collectively as unions.
Collectively, right?
So as I understand it, I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, but as I understand it, they are right there now in forming a trade union congress in Dominica. And that should take place within the next couple of months, as I understand it, this year. And that is great news. That is something that has been talked about and been pursued over the years, but never really got to it. But that'd be excellent, excellent news. The formation of a trade union congress in Dominica, where several things can take place. We have not at the trade union congress, but we have the CCL, Caribbean Congress of Labor, in the region in Barbados. And I will also add, Tony, some of the unions have not, it's not just a question of dealing with the day-to-day work relation things. In Trinidad, you have a college that teaches all sorts of a range of subjects and topics to workers and their families and other persons. In Jamaica, you also have a college in Guyana. So you have institutes where the union's involved in that. In some of the territories, the union is involved in other services like daycare centers for the employees' children. So you're working, you don't have a daycare center, place to put your kid. They have that available. They have cafeterias. I mean, you name it. A bunch of stuff that they provide for the members. So I think I will end here by saying that this notion that unions have outlived their usefulness, they're no longer required, or it's whatever. That's a myth. That's furthest from the truth. As long as you have persons working in whatever field of work, there will be a need to have unions. You might call it trade union, you call it labor movement, the nomenclature, whatever it is, but the fact remains that as workers, you have that right to come together, form trade unions, as I said, it's protected under the Constitution, to represent your best interests. And that best interest can range from anything from your day-to-day working conditions of work to a number of other things the unions can do and get involved.
And you know, as you said, the unions and the union leadership has to adapt and evolve.
Yes.
And so for example, you might have, because of the way it is, you might have a union where union can start to provide health insurance for all their employees.
That's another area. That's a perfect area that is in existence now. That's right.
Yeah, and if you have a Congress, it can probably be done through the Congress, so that as you move from one job to the next, as long as you remain in the union, you can still get your benefits and you don't have to start all over again. You have the situation where unions can, as technology changes or as workers contribute more to the innovation in a company, unions could probably negotiate for workers to have ownership stake in the companies that they work for, and all of those things. And so the unions have to make themselves more visibly beneficial to the average worker. And as you said, and they have to bring the employers and the government along with them, because while it might seem easier to negotiate with each one person at a time, it's only a benefit until you butt up against that essential worker that your business depends on, and he or she starts to hold you to ransom. So, for example, if you are a company, say, that produces a certain product, you might have one key employee that can operate that particular machinery, and that key employee decides to go rogue and demand from you, all of a sudden that person has you over a barrel. Wouldn't you wish that you have a union that you can go to and let the union deal with his union member, instead of you having to deal with each person and each personality? And so the union has to really position themselves as that buffer, in both directions, and not make it so contentious that the employer simply sees you in an antagonistic way. You mentioned the almost inevitable transition from trade unionism into politics, and I think that was very beneficial because we had folks going into politics who understood, who experienced it, and therefore could pass worker-friendly legislature. But then once that person becomes government, especially in a country like Dominica and some of the other islands, where the government now is the biggest employer in the country. So that person who used to be the chairman or the president or the general secretary of the union is now on the government side, and he's the employer, or she is the employer. And that now puts, if that person now, if their priorities shift, you now have that conflict where that person seems to be a traitor or a betrayer of the union cause. Before I toss it back to you, the other scenario that we see is that members of the union, in the absence of the union leadership and union membership having a strong message where the role of the union is very clear to all its members, you find other interests usurping and overpowering the interests of the members. So, for example, a member might put their political affiliation above their loyalty to the union and their fellow workers, so that when their party is the party in government, they do not want to support a strike. They do not want to support hard negotiations, and so on and so forth. And so those are the challenges that a modern trade union face, that the leaders have to find a way to tap dance and to
I mean, those areas are real life areas that you've just outlined. I mean, I won't sit here and pretend that they're not. But at the end of the day, as we always say to folks, you can talk as much as you want about policies, whether it's at the private sector level or governmental level, until some of those policies, especially when we're talking about the broad policies, we need a union, it's always here, but what about the effect? When you talk about the broad policies, okay, unless those are effective into law, it means nothing, Tony.
Right.
In our same JCI creed again, there is a tenet that says government must be of laws rather than of men.
Right.
And that simply means that's how a society operates. You have a constitution and you have a set of laws that guides how we relate with each other. Okay? Now, and like I said, in the early part when that transition took place, it was felt that if we have friends in the legislation, friends of labor, or persons who understand labor, then that's how we're going to get the Employment Protection Act passed. We're going to get the Labor Contract Act passed. We're going to have the Labor Standard Act passed. And all of those acts that I just mentioned there were passed. Now, yes, you do have the one or two that will go rogue. And that is where the union now must not let down its guard on its advocacy and call it out when you have to call it out. Call it out when you have to call it out. And it goes back again where the union itself can get involved in the whole political process. So if there's a particular chap who happens to have been on our side, we put him there in the parliament and hoping, we're not saying you go there and everything you're going to do is just for us. But say, for example, there's a bill to amend the Labor Standard Act to provide for the minimum wage from $10 to $12 or $13, and you decide otherwise and put yourself interest in there. It means the union has a responsibility to campaign and canvass as much as possible so you don't get elected again.
Right.
And get you out. And that is why I am of the view, I hold the firm view, that unions should not divorce itself from politics. Should not divorce itself from politics. You have a role and you have a say, because this is what's going to determine the what you call it, the country that you live in. It will determine how much you pay for a pound of sugar, a pound of rice. It will determine whether or not you get a good education or not. It will determine whether your teachers will have the supplies that they need to teach the student in the classroom. It will determine whether the nurses have the equipment and the medical supplies to discharge their duties as nurses, the fireman. So all there comes in the role and the impact of the union. So
no, I mean, one of the listeners
shy away from it.
One of the listeners alluded to the effectiveness of the union, which I think is right in the realm of what you're discussing. Do you want to maybe talk about that?
Well, again, the effectiveness of the union, and again, when we talk about the union, I guess we're talking not just from a leadership point of view, but from an overall membership point of view.
Right.
And the leaders will be as effective as the membership allow them to be effective. I know leadership, we will say and we will agree that in any organization, leadership matters. But at the same time, if we, the members, do not advocate, agitate as much as they should, then the leaders will remain in their complacency. And what you had in the 30s was an agitation. Remember what I told you started off? Unrest on the fields, in the workplaces. It didn't require any leader to tell them to put down their thing and start a trouble, you know. They started a trouble. And yes, you had one or two individuals like the Bustamante and the CeeLo Black who emerged and came in and say, yeah, boy, you're right, let's do it. So I think in terms of the effectiveness, and therein again lies the question of adapting to change. How do you get your message across to the young people, particularly the young worker, to understand why it is necessary to have a union? One way of looking at it again, like I've shared before, is we insure our car, we insure our homes, we insure, it's an insurance. But the job that you have to provide you with the income to pay the car note or to pay your mortgage is not insured. It's wide open. So it's wide open to the whims and fancies of the employer, who can take it away from you anytime as he, the employer, feels. So you have not insured your job, but you depend on that job to shop, to buy, to pay your mortgage and everything. And that's a job that, if it remains uninsured, unprotected, can go in any minute. We referred to the Protection of Employment Act. You're working with a company for the last 20 or more years, and he just decide to get rid of you. no severance pay, no redundancy payment, no notice. Your 20 years just went down the drain as a result of the unions enforcing and fighting for and having what is called a Protection of Employment Act. You will now be compensated. So at least you get something for your 20 years.
Right.
We talk about the other protections, the Labor Standard Act, the contract. One of the more recent legislations was the Labor Contract Act, because it was felt at the time employers were getting around from the other various legislation like the Labor Standard Act and just employing people on a contract willy-nilly. There is a Labor Contract Act, Act number of 1983, chapter 8904, that speaks to terms and condition of employment, including job title, termination condition, amendments. So, in other words, all of these persons who they refer to them as NEP or whatever they refer to them, and although I don't advocate for a plethora of contracts, but these people under the law entitled to a contract. And that contract must outline a number of things in that contract. And if that contract is violated, they have redress under that contract, the law, and the Constitution. How many of them are aware of that?
So when the Prime Minister of Dominica says, if I want to end the
No,
NEP
he cannot.
program, I can just
He cannot.
end it China, and he should
cannot
not
do
be
that.
able to. Mhm.
No. If you are under a contract under the Labor Contract Act of 1983, which outlines, I don't have the full copy here, but it's a fully outlined, detailed contract that says what should go in that contract. And you
Yeah,
can
an agreement between an
violate that
employee and an
contract.
employer. Yeah.
And that was because it was felt that employers at the time was just willy-nilly taking people in and feel I can let you go as I want. So they would get away from this Protection of Employment Act and the Labor Standard Act. And the union said, no. You can't do that. And that was a way to where they felt persons who were not members of a union that would benefit from the protection of the other laws, they would take advantage of. We say, no, you have to have a Labor Contract Act. And the act must outline. But again, in the absence of that information, in the absence of the union articulating those things, nobody knows. You're not knowledgeable about something. There's no action.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know. Exactly. But these laws are there. They were fought for over the years, and I think unions will continue to be there. We have to adapt to change, like everything else. I mean, like I said, we now have AI. AI now is a challenge to these folks in Hollywood. The script writers and all these people are fearful that AI now will come and take away their jobs. What they're doing now, they're creative thing. But again, you can have now, and that is why it is so important now, even more important for these actors and those persons in that field to form themselves in some form of union to protect their interests because of this technology that is likely to come, of which the employer will take advantage of. Not the technology on of its own, but the company who is utilizing that. So the companies through which the various, production companies, film production companies, who decide how to, rather than use this guild, these writers, use AI instead to do what it is. They need to form themselves into a union, which they have done, and they have effectively, I mean, they were out on the picket line sometime last year, I think it was, for several months. And eventually they won. They won. So it again, as I said, it's not going to go anywhere soon. It evolves. We have to adapt to change. We have to recognize the workforce is changing. It's not the workforce today, not the workforce of the 1930s. Even one of the strongest unions in the US, for example, the auto industry, they're one of the strongest. those guys in the auto business. But even that have changed. Various components of the cars that were being done manually 10, 15, 20 years ago, some of that is done by robots now. You still have the manual element with it, but some of those components are done by robots. You walk into one of those car assembly and you see a robot hand holding a part and putting it there, doing this, doing that, taking the car, moving it there, and all of that. But that's not to say that you won't require persons, because these robot machines themselves have to be serviced.
They have to be serviced.
Yes, they're robots, but they're on. You have the technical people now that have to service them, make sure they're working right, make sure the batteries or whatever is working in it is working, to put them together, to maintain them, to keep it clean, to keep it efficient. You're gonna need workers in the assembly plant. So we're not going anywhere anytime soon. Never.
And that's good news. As you said, the most important thing now is the education, the promotion of the role of the union,
the messaging.
Yeah, the messaging, and to recognize the need to evolve. What was effective? People keep saying, well, in the 70s we had this strong movement, and now, but the environment has changed, and so the union has to be able to adapt.
Yeah, the message has to change. Yeah, absolutely. The message and it's the same. And it's the same, Tony. I know we are focusing on the unions, but it's the same in politics. You hear the same thing being said today. Oh, young people are not engaged in politics and whatever. Again, some of the political parties have not learned that we are in a different space now. And how do you engage more young people? What kind of messaging you bring across, especially in the light of the fact that you have more corrupt politicians and corrupt individuals vying for office. Those are not the days when you had the people like the Eric Williams and those, people of a certain repute that know why they went into government and the politics of people. So the messaging has to change. Those of us who still want to maintain that democracy and all of that has to recognize that we are in a complete different landscape right now. And the approach that was used in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s cannot be the same approach. It has to change. Back then when I was General Secretary, we didn't have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff, So I remember night upon night, we had an old guest in a machine to do the newsletter constantly, full typewriter. You could hear it from a mile down the road, typing pladak, 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 pladak. That was the stuff that I used during my time, doing flyers and all that kind of stuff. Now, you in a minute you could do a flyer, and in a minute you could spread information on a piece of a phone in your hand.
And everybody has a receiver,
to 200,000 people in Dominica and out of Dominica, So it's a different environment, and the unions have to find a way to engage and capitalize on that new environment.
All right. Alvin, we've gone past our hours now because there's so much information. It's really rich and it's really relevant. So I want to thank you for coming on. I give you opportunity to make some closing remarks. And to really say that this is a conversation, this type of conversation needs to happen more. Let people understand what unions have done and what they continue to do and the need that they have to continue to need them. So when Pyro in the audience says about effectiveness,
that's my buddy, Pyro, that's my buddy, man.
Yeah, he's right on the money. He's right on the money. They exist, but do they just exist in name?
Yes.
But do they have to look at the day-to-day and see how they can remain relevant and effective for their individual members? So let's just say some closing remarks, and then we can bring this conversation.
Well, thanks, Tony, again for the invite. It's always a pleasure to come on the program and to have that kind of conversation. Like we say, the time flies by so quickly. by the time we start to talk, you're always already on that. But yeah, it's always a pleasure. I love doing this. I am passionate at heart of the trade union movement and the labor movement. I have learned quite a bit myself by being involved in the labor movement, not just locally in Dominica at my time, but regionally as well and internationally. You know, and I know the importance of having a well organized, solid trade union, labor movement, whatever you want to call it. And I will again end on the note for those of us who are listening, and to say to you that that word trade union is enshrined in our constitution. The word Employers Federation is not enshrined there. DIC, Dominican Employers Federation, is not enshrined there. Teachers Association, nothing like that. But the word trade union is in our fundamental rights and freedom in our constitution. So that in itself tells you, as a worker, you have a right to form and be part of a trade union. That's your right. And there are several legislations currently on the books, and more will come, that protects and ensures and guarantees that right for you. So it is not something that any employer or any government decide if they feel like it, they will do it. No, you have a right to it. My word and closing word to the trade unions, as we celebrate, as I said, this year marks 87 years in the region, starting in Jamaica. And by the way, in Trinidad, the oil field is a powerful union. Still very powerful in Trinidad to a certain extent. They celebrate theirs I think they celebrate theirs somewhere in June 1940, about, if I'm not mistaken. But the unions themselves, I think, need to recognize where we are currently compared to where they started off back in the 30s, and to take advantage of that. I'm gratified by the fact that, like I told you, there is foot ahead now to form a trade union congress in Dominica. I think that speaks volume. It means that we have come a long way. And I'm sure out of that trade union congress, they'll be able to come together, those who are going to form that congress, and be able to advocate in a much more effective and organized way on behalf of working people in Dominica. And that's across the board. Across the board. There will always be workers in whatever shape or form, in whatever industry, private sector, public sector, quasi-government structure, you name it, there will be workers. So thanks again, Tony, for having me. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure, and look forward to continuing the conversation, because quite frankly, we've just scratched the surface. One aspect of it, which we may at some point want to explore in a little more detail, is the relationship between trade unions and politics.
Yeah.
What that relationship looks like. Because some people have their views about it. Trade unions should not get involved in politics. The two should remain separate apart. We can have a dialogue on that, a conversation, and look at what are the merits of it and what are the downsides. And if at all a trade union is engaged in the question of politics, what are some of, what are the do's and don'ts, put it this way then. But
yeah, how can you put up fencing? Guardrails. Yeah. Okay, so Alvin, thank you so much, as I said, for coming on. You're always welcome. We see you as an emissary of TDN, of This Week in Interview. You go out and you contribute so much, and you're super busy. So I'm always grateful when I call on you and you're willing to come. But I could not think of a better person to come to have this discussion with. And you did not disappoint. As always, exceed expectation, come prepared with your dates and your background. And so we are amazed, and we thank you for what you continue to do. And we look forward to the next time that you are going to be here. And as you said, we could continue talking about the role of trade unions and in politics and in other aspects of our lives. And maybe we can have a conversation with some of the leaders, especially that Congress get formed, and get some suggestions into them and that sort of thing. So thank you so much for being on tonight. A pleasure.
Thank you, man. Thanks. Pleasure.
Yeah. So, folks, there you have it. I promised you that it was going to be a wonderful conversation. As usual, Alvin is so full of knowledge and experience, and his skill at getting the information, the backup, and to really position it to you in a manner that that you can digest. Tonight we spoke about trade unions, and trade unions are super, super relevant. Most of the quality of life, our pay, our conditions of work, the fact that our loved ones can go to work and work in hazardous profession, but come back home with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and their 2 eyes, and their hearing protection, and all of that. A lot of those things can be attributed to the advocacy, the negotiations of trade unions. And so, folks, I want to wish you one more time a week of worker celebration. Our nurses, happy Nurses Week. If you celebrated your birthday, happy birthday to you, anniversary, happy anniversary to you. Whatever it is that you celebrate, we wish you well. And if you had some unfortunate occurrence, maybe a loved one of yours passed on, or you're not enjoying the best of health, I wish you strength and comfort at this time. So we do this again next week. In the meantime, check out our books that we have, and support. So all of us in solidarity, and in solidarity with unions, in solidarity with workers, out in a quest for better employment opportunity. I want to say good night and see you next week.